Hi and welcome back to Classic MGB. Now today we're at Kimber House to have a look at a very special MGB. It's one that took part in the London to Sydney Rally in 1968. The Marathon Rally was probably one of the most gruelling and challenging motorsport competitions in modern times. The event was conceived by Sir Max Aitken, owner of the Daily Express, who sponsored the event and offered a £10,000 prize for the winner. About $210,000 in today's money. The route covered more than 10,000 miles over the course of 24 days and took the competitors from Crystal Palace on the outskirts of London all the way to Sydney in Australia via Europe, India and then by sea across the Indian Ocean to Fremantle to complete the remaining 2,900 miles to Sydney. All in all, 92 cars started the rally and just 56 finished, including the famous MGB, driven by Jean Denton and Tom Boyce. One of the competitors who actually took part in the rally alongside Paddy Hopkirk was well-known racing and rally driver Alec Poole.
It was a big deal, that the London to Sydney. It was on the news and the media all the time. In fact, I was just reading a book recently from Adrian Newey. One of his earliest memories of getting interested in motor was when he was at school, following hour by hour anything he could glean about the London to Sydney rally. So it was a big deal at the time. We drove the whole way to Bombay, down through Germany and Italy and across Yugoslavia to the Bosporus. We did the event in Morris 1800, which was then was known as the Land Crab. The styling was pretty awful. It was like a scaled up Mini, and it had hydroelastic suspension. So in a way, it was an ideal car for the event because it rode well. It wasn't sort of banging and crashing. I did have a bit of sympathy for Jean in the MGB because it would have been that much lower and more likely to be banging and crashing around the place, pressing it hard when we were off tarmac. For Jean and her co-driver, it would have been like both of them sitting in a Ryanair seat for a week. That's all. So it must have been horrific. Full marks to her for doing it. And not an ideal car. Mind you, as we all know, MGB, tough as old boots. Of course, the factory would look after any privateer. So if she stopped with a problem, of course, they would do their best to fix it. But they didn't have any intrinsic MGB spares.
One of the challenges of the event, obviously, it was a low car, but quite fast for what it was doing. One of the 500-mile long stages they had was through the middle of Australia, where it was doing well. But then all of a sudden there was a big hole in the road, and the car went in, came out the other side to find that the engine had gone forward and through the radiator. Luckily, they got out of the car. There was no damage to Jean or to Tom Boyce. But there was a group from MG Car Club Australia were following the event. And surprise, surprise, a few of them were driving MGBs. So they borrowed an MGB radiator. Somebody had some welding stuff. They managed to get the mountings back and put the engine back in its right place, put the new radiator in, fill it up with some fluids, and away it went again. If those guys weren't there from Australia MG Car Club, it perhaps wouldn't have made the finish.
If I had to sum up the rally and the experience in 3 words, all I can say is fantastic. What a fantastic experience.
Whilst Alec, Paddy and their teammate Tony Nash went on to finish second, Jean and Tom finished in a creditable 42nd place out of a total of 56 finishers. Whilst Jean went on to drive other cars in both races and rallies after the event, the Marathon MGB itself disappeared into obscurity, and little is known about what happened to the car until it reappeared many years later in a scrapyard.
I became involved in this project of the marathon car in March 2015 when an email came into Kimber House from a gentleman who pulled it out of a garage on the south coast. Alan Zafer, who used to be the advertising manager for BL, and Bill Price, who was special tuning manager, went to look at it. And they came back saying, yes, it is the car that Jean Denton did the event in. That was on, I think, a Tuesday. So on the Friday, 3 of us, Roger Boyce, myself and Jeff Edwards, who was the treasurer of the MGB Register, decided we'd go and have a look at the car. And it was a horrible colour of purpley blue sort of thing. There was nothing on the front, no rhubards on the front, no tanks on the back. The only thing that was on there was a special tuning spare wheel carrier on the boot and a roll cage. But on the dash was the extra dash in the middle, which held a speed pilot, which for a classic rally is a valuable bit of kit. So I thought, well, we've got some value there. There was an engine in it. We didn't know whether it worked or whatever.
We decided that it was of interest to us. So we went to speak to Aaron, the man who owned it, and with a bit of negotiation, he was quite keen for it to be sold. And I believe we agreed on a price of £900, which involved him also bringing it up to British Motor Heritage's place on our behalf so that we could start the rebuild of the vehicle. We crawled about as best we could underneath it and took some photographs. It had lots of reinforcement underneath the car where there'd been plates had been welded on. The engine itself had got lots of minor modifications that you could see quite easily. For example, all the nuts and bolts on there had been drilled and wired so they wouldn't fall apart. It looked as though there was different suspension on it, but we couldn't really discover exactly what it was. So we decided that, as we were fairly certain that it was what we thought it was, we thought there's a pretty good chance that we could bring it back at least to something like the sort of standard it was in. It was a bit of a challenge and there was a certain amount of risk involved in doing it. But when we'd negotiated a price that was fairly suitable, the risk wasn't that great overall. So we decided we would give it a go.
And then it started off just researching it, really. The good old Mr. Google and various other bits and pieces. And luckily, being in Abingdon, there was still a lot of competition people around. People like Peter Browning, who did the event, Bill Price, who did the event, some of the mechanics that did the event, to get information from them. We then started researching the bits and pieces of the car and finding out about Jean. She was 33 when the rally took place in 1968, but unfortunately passed away in 2001. She had quite a career. She used to race a lot, and we believe that the body shell they used for the marathon was her race car. She ended up as Baroness of Wakefield, if I remember rightly, and she worked in John Major's government. So she was quite an active girl. She was very high up in PR, advertising, working for British Leyland and various other organisations. And the sponsor that she had for the event, Nova, was a very racy women's magazine of the 60s, you know, a bit like Hello magazine of the 2000s. And we managed to get some copies of the magazine, and in there is a double-page spread of her in the car with all the things that they took with them, including 2 revolvers in there, and spares and torches and things. The car, we felt at the time, in 2015 when we found it, was a bit of history. The London to Sydney Marathon was a massive, massive event. And to have an MGB drive 10,000 miles in 10 days was just, you know, you'd never pick a car like that to do that event.
When they got it back to British Motor Heritage, you were really kind. They helped us a great deal. We stored it there for a while. We cleaned it all up, which was a real job to do. And we began to realise that there was a lot more modification to the vehicle than we actually expected to see. Then we did a bit of research to find out where these parts had all come from and realised then that it was going to be worth doing. Still a big task to do it because we had absolutely no idea where or how we were going to produce all the work to do it. Anyway, we decided that we would not necessarily rebuild it to exactly the standard it was in. We would try and sympathetically restore it back to something good. When the engine was actually taken apart, we began to realise that there were some quite interesting parts actually in the vehicle then. We started the work about 6 months after we'd first found the car, and it was a bit disjointed to start off with because there was no real plan to do too much. Eventually we decided that various people would take on various parts of it, and I volunteered with a friend of mine to do the engine. He was the man with the skills, and I was the T-boy and cleaner generally. John Watson decided that he would obtain as many of the parts as he could, particularly the fog lights. There was one that had no innards to it, but it was the shell was there. So we decided that we would try and get those. And people were really kind. We put a note in the Safety Fast magazine, and people had got them in their garage. So some of these turned up. Again, they were a bit dented and no glass on them or whatever. But we managed to find lots of those bits, so they were also rebuilt. But the rebuild was quite long-winded, to be honest.
The support from members and other people was absolutely amazing. I remember one guy phoned me up, a member who's been a member of the car club for a long time, said, I read in Safety Fast about the marathon car. I went there. I got a program. It's in the attic. I'll find it and post it to you.
It was brought over to a friend of mine's garage, Malcolm Sayers, and he started the main strip down for it. We took it all apart and we found the head, and sure enough, it had got double springs fitted to it. It got bigger valves, and it had been worked on quite hard. To be quite honest, we didn't really know what had happened to it, but we did find that we could go and actually talk to Tom Boyce, which was a real surprise, this was. And he then told us all about the head and how it had been modified. And we realised then it was important that we kept it as best we could in that sense.
The engine wasn't standard, it was tuned. Everybody was very scared of what the fuel quality was. And I know enough about that. That was my subject at Imperial. You had to have some judicious use of the throttle at certain times, but there was no point backing off on compression ratio and losing performance. So we ran with some semi-race mod. We ran a 9-to-1 compression, for example. And we had a semi-race cam, but we needed the power with all that weight.
When we took the engine apart, we realised that the block would need to have a rebuild done on it because it was in poor condition. We took it to a garage who were going to look at it for us and give us their opinion. And he discovered, that it was cracked. It proved impossible for it to be repaired, but he did have another block. And as it wasn't heavily modified in any way, we decided that we would probably do better to change it that way. Then the whole engine was then taken to Bracknell, where it was rebuilt for us by Classic Restorations. The time frame was quite long because they had agreed to do it for us without any labour charges, which was really good. And most of the parts that we required were obtained from Moss without any charge as well. So the actual cost was low, but there was a bit of a delay getting it done. The interior was really poor, but we had decided not to do too much with that, largely because it was part of its sort of story. It was pristine, it wouldn't be right. So when the engine rebuild was finished, which was in 2016, the whole lot, the car, the chassis, everything was delivered to Abingdon Restorations. The car is owned by the MG Car Club. It went in 2017 to Silverstone, which was the first time it was on display. And then it was officially unveiled in 2018 at the Car Restoration Show. And Pete Smith, who was one of the gentlemen who worked on the car at the time, came along with his wife and they unveiled it for us. Big day, that.
Since 2018 at the NEC, it's been to 2 or 3 shows again at the NEC. It's been to Gaydon 2 or 3 times for the Historic Marathon Rally Group events. It's been to MG Live, their car club event, MG Live, most years since then, and taken to smaller events around the country. It went to an event that Caledonian Centre were putting on, so it went up there. It spends most of its life here at MG Car Club office in Kimber House, Abingdon, where people can come and see it and where we get visitors from all around the world, and especially Australians, funny enough. And so when they come in and see it, they can't believe that car is there and actually drove through Australia. One of the organisations that we've loaned the car to is the MG Car Club Young Members Group, which we're trying to promote to get more younger people involved with MGs and also to join the car club and do things which they're very keen of doing. So we let them drive it around. So it's done the rounds. So we're actually going to sell it. It's going on auction Probably. We don't know exactly how we're going to sell it, but it's going to go on auction at the tail end of MG 100 year, which is the end of 2024. So somebody who it might be anywhere, it could be an Australian, who knows, it might go back to Australia. We know our friends in MG India were very keen on it as well, so who knows where it will end up. My involvement, to sum it up, has been enjoyment because it was rallying, which is I've always loved rallying, and the enjoyment of working with colleagues from the MGB Register to produce this amazing vehicle.
It was an adventure and it was good fun. We had the camaraderie of doing it was excellent. And the achievement was very satisfying in that sense. I remember the cold days in the garage of doing the engine and the muck and bullets and whatever. It was fun. Bacon sandwiches. Yeah, it was good fun.
So let's take a closer look at the finished car. The rhubards dominate the front of the car, complete with grills to protect the headlights. The additional lighting is also very clear to see. There's also a spotlight that can be controlled from the cockpit to allow extra visibility of the route. Moving to the rear of the car, the most obvious modifications are the fuel and water containers mounted behind the number plate and the boot-mounted spare wheel. The powerful reversing light is also clearly visible. Perhaps less obvious are the additional jacking points, making it easier to raise the car for maintenance. So that's the lowdown on the car, but MGBs are made to be driven. So that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to follow in the footsteps of Jean Denton and Tom Boyce and take the Marathon MGB onto the roads of Abingdon. Okay, so we're off. We're just leaving Kimber House. Joining me in the car and driving it is Neil Brant from the MGB Register. He's director of the MG Car Club. And you'll see that I've got this microphone because it is quite noisy in here. There's no soundproofing, there's no carpets.
Absolutely, it's real. It just gets all your senses. There's no getting away from it. We're in a competition car and it's going to be noisy, bumpy, and we're going to know all about it.
So we've literally done 100 yards and already it's feeling quite hot in here. It must have been absolutely intolerable driving across Australia.
It must have been. You can feel the heat coming, soaking up through the tunnel here. The tunnel's actually getting hot on the leg already. You can imagine in 34-degree heat in the middle of the outback, it must have been absolute horrible experience.
So already I can feel that the suspension is pretty hard. It's pretty sort of rock solid, not much movement at all.
That's it. It's, we all know the British roads aren't in the best condition at the moment, so this is probably pretty comparable to driving up the Khyber Pass, to be honest.
I'm not sure Oxfordshire County Council would think much of that, but you're probably right. So yeah, so how does it compare driving this to your beautiful MGB?
It's a very different experience, yeah. This is a competition car. It's not here for the driving down to the garden centre on a Sunday afternoon. It's there to win a competition, and it's a lot more hard work in here. When we hit that bump going over the A34 bridge there, there's no power assisted steering. The brakes are not the greatest at the moment, but we will find a gear. There we go, we got one.
So it seems a lot more sort of rattly, Neil, and kind of noisy just generally. There's no refinement in here, is there?
There isn't. It's got beefed up suspension to deal with, obviously, those unmade roads. And you can feel it now. We're going to give it a bit of acceleration as we come out the 20 limit. You can hear the exhaust starting to boom. And it's good fun, actually. So we may say it's rough and ready, but it's good fun, rough and ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see how it comes into this corner. Nice and compliant. Yeah, very good. When it came back from the marathon race, they put a different differential on it to rally up in Scotland, so it had a lower ratio. So that's been taken off and it's a more standard diff on it at the moment.
So originally this car would obviously have been built in Abingdon. Say 1968 or 67, it was probably quite new.
That's it, it'd have been around then, 67, 68, when it was shipped from the works department, competition department, to go up and as a privateering entry into the race. It would have been worked on. fettled by Jean Denton's husband.
So this car's literally been around the world. It's been all the way to Australia and all the way back.
That's it. It's incredible, isn't it? It's been all that way, and it's still going strong all these years later. Here we are in 2024, and yeah, we would, if we wanted to, we'd have no problem keeping up with the traffic in front. We'd just hold it back a bit, but yeah, it's still a very usable classic, but a classic with a lot of history.
But there's no luxuries in here at all, is there? You know, it's really sort of rough and ready.
That's it. It's very much utilitarian. We've got the map reading lights. We've got all the spotlights down here. So yeah, if we're out in the deepest part of the Khyber Pass, then we'd light up the road. We've got a very large reversing light. So yeah, we've got all the functionality we need, but none of the refinement.
So now we're in this Marathon MGB and we're actually on part of the old test route. Absolutely fantastic. So 60 odd years ago, this car would have done this route, probably, and now we're doing it again. I think that's quite special, Neil.
It is. Every MGB, well, for that matter, every MG that came off the production line here at Aberdeen would have come down the test route. There are slight variations on it, but we know what the route was for the standard MGB. And all these years later, we're back on it.
So performance of this car is likely to be more or less similar to a slightly warmed up standard MGB.
It certainly feels that way, yeah. Certainly it's got the liveliness in first, second gear, and it picks up a reasonable amount of torque in third, get up to a good rev range. So yeah, it's not your tune, but I think it would give any standard MGB a good run for its money, to be honest. Yeah, I find I shift up to third too soon on this one. I think I could stay in third a bit longer compared to my GT.
Does it have different ratios then, or?
Yeah, I don't think the ratios are too much off. I just think it's, you know, this has been re-bought to 20 thou, I think. So it's, yeah, slightly bigger.
Oh, let's try and avoid the first. Oh! We missed it. We missed it. We didn't get it.
Yeah, those room bars on the front. That's just what you need for the pheasants of Oxfordshire.
So, if you had to summarise this car, Neil, how would you summarise it?
I think it's everything you'd expect from an in-period 1960s rally car. It's rough, it's ready, it's exciting, it's great fun to drive. You wouldn't take your great aunt out for a Sunday afternoon drive in it, but you'd probably take your teenage son out and give him a bit of a thrill. Myself, I'm going to have to buy a lottery ticket because I quite fancy buying this car.
So that's it, that's the Marathon MGB, and actually you've got an opportunity to own this car. You can see in the background the guy from Bonhams is taking photos. It's going to be available in the Bonhams auction at the Goodwood Revival in September. So get the catalogue, have a look. No idea what it's going to make, but let's see. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and of course share the video with anybody that's interested. As always, thanks for watching and take care.